This is Made in America with Neal Asbury and Rich Roffman.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Roffman. So, Rich, we've covered a number of times over the years. How many years we've been doing this? What, about 14 years?
14 and a half years.
We just mentioned earlier today. Yeah. The whole right to work issue.
Oh, many times.
Many times. And how many states? It's close to 30 states now that have right to work.
28 states? Is that what it is?
Is it 28 states that has right to work legislation, which basically means that you don't have to join a union to work.
Right.
Or you don't have to join a union and pay dues to a union that you don't agree with or think that you don't need.
You don't have to lose money.
It's a choice.
If you don't want to lose money.
I mean, isn't that the right way?
It seems fairly significant to me.
You got to pay off somebody so you could have your job. And then, by the way, 90% of the political donation, I mean, maybe it's even 98% of the money that the unions give is to the Democrats. So you're basically funding a political party with your dues that you may object to, that you may not believe in.
Which was a basis for a lawsuit a few years ago.
Several.
Yeah. I mean, remember out in California?
Right.
It was a big deal. It was a big loss for the union.
Right. You could not be forced to join a union and pay dues.
Exactly.
That you disagreed with.
Exactly.
Well, anyway.
Well, that covered the whole thing.
A congressman from South Carolina, Joe Wilson, has introduced the National Right to Work Act. So these 28 states that has a right to work have economically prospered. I mean, take a look at a lot of the big manufacturing that's moved in from Europe and from around the world, the auto plants and so forth.
BMW is a great example. Mercedes has a plant here. Volkswagen was a big fight with the union. We covered that for weeks.
Right,
don't you remember? Steve Moore was on constantly discussing it with us.
And, it's not a coincidence that these large manufacturing operations, when they do pick a place and a location, they end up in right-to-work states. So why not make it national? Sounds like a good plan to me.
Well, you think it would be a logical thing to do, wouldn't it? Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Rich, our first guest is Greg Mourad. He is from the National Right to Work Committee. Greg, welcome to Made in America.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
Let's listen to a quick soundbite from Senator Rand Paul talking about right to work.
Well, 28 states have right to work, including Kentucky, and it's a great excitement for people to come to the state. Boeing and others went to South Carolina because it was a right to work state. Many of the car manufacturers went to Alabama as a right to work state. So right to work is a great draw. And really, why don't we make it for the whole country? Then the whole country becomes a great draw. Simply says you have a right not to join a union, and they can't enforce sort of a closed shop. And it's been good for 28 different states. I think it'd be great for the country. If the Congress refuses to do this, it'll still be an advantage for Kentucky, and people can come to Kentucky. But I'd like to make it an advantage for our entire country.
Yeah, I mean, I think the senator is on to something there. Greg, what do you say?
Well, he absolutely is. And Right to Work is a proven job creation engine. Multiple surveys of site selection consultants, the folks that help companies choose where to build or expand their operations, say that, especially with manufacturing jobs, companies, half to three-quarters of them immediately strike the non-right to work states off the list. If you don't have a right to work law, you're not even considered, and nothing else matters. So a national right to work law would be a job creation engine for the whole country.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is a very passionate thing to get involved in. And, if we remember the big fight that Boeing had, Neal, they were pulling out of some of the work they were doing in Seattle. It was their hometown. And they were going to South Carolina. And the Obama administration actually, took it personally and went after them legally. I mean, they tried to, fight them in court that they actually couldn't do it. That a corporation couldn't make a decision that they want to build another plant, move into a different state, a non-union state, which belies the whole point that, the Democratic Party are really so aligned with the unions. We all know that. Joe Biden mentions that all the time. A lot of his speeches, great union jobs. Of course, a lot of it, not everyone's in the union, but hey, what the heck. So, but that was a big, big deal. And, how does it stand right now when people look at this and they're saying, wait a minute, why do all these companies want to come to these states that are doing so well? And by staying where they were, i.e. Detroit, what has happened to those cities versus the right-to-work cities and states?
Yeah, the right-to-work cities and states are doing much better, much better. In fact, studies show that inflation-adjusted and cost of living-adjusted real income is higher for the employees in the right-to-work states as well. So there's really no reason in the world for a company to want to go into one of those forced unionism states. The main reason that they like the right-to-work states is because it means that a company that treats its employees well has less fear of a union coming in and saying, hey, we're going to have this contract where the guy that swings a hammer isn't allowed to plug in an extension cord, because happy employees don't need to unionize. They don't want to give their money to a union that's not going to do anything for them. In a non-right-to-work state, the union can push its way in through it with a variety of coercive tactics, force its way into that workforce, and then force them all to pay dues. In a right-to-work environment, a happy workforce that has a union forced on them is not going to pay the dues. And so there's less incentive for the union to push its way into a workforce that doesn't need it and doesn't want it.
So, Greg, kind of update us. I know that, in California, there was this, it went to the Supreme Court about being forced to join a union. In this particular case, a state union, a government union, to be able to have a government job, you were forced to join a union and pay dues. And
right.
that was unconstitutional, correct?
Yeah, I think you're thinking of the Janus case.
The Janus case, exactly.
Illinois.
That's exactly right.
But Bruce Janus was a government employee in Illinois who didn't want to pay union dues, didn't think he should have to. His union wasn't serving his interests. And yes, with help from Right to Work Legal Foundation attorneys, took that case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the court did indeed agree that everything a government union does, including the bargaining, is inherently political. We're talking about spending the public purse. And if it's inherently political, you cannot force people to pay for it. For any of it. And then so we won that case for Bruce Janus, and as a result, no government worker in the country can be forced to pay dues to a union to get or keep their job anymore.
And what happened since the Janus decision?
Here?
What happened since? I mean, the unions were kind of predicting gloom and doom that now that people didn't have to pay, they'd still get the benefit, but they didn't have to pay for it, and then that the union membership would drop substantially. Did that happen?
Yeah, well, let me address first the presumption in the union statement that's just completely false, which is that the union benefit is actually the union contract is actually a benefit to all of them. It's not a benefit to all of them. Union contracts inherently work against employees, for example, who want to work longer, harder, or smarter and be rewarded for it. Union contracts almost always reward nothing but seniority, and so it inherently discriminates against some workers in favor of others. And if you don't think their contract is a benefit to you, you certainly shouldn't be forced to pay for representation that you're stuck with against your will. That said, and in terms of employees quitting unions, large numbers of them have in various states where the state allows the union to bargain on their behalf, because all of a sudden they're free to say, you know what, we don't think this union is bargaining on our behalf. It's bargaining on somebody else's behalf, and it's spending on money on other things we don't care about. And so they've been free to quit, and large numbers of them have been quitting. That said, it doesn't seem to have diminished union power over those states' governments very much yet, because those unions still rake in millions and billions of dollars. Big Labor brings in $20 billion in forced dues every year. They spend at least $2 billion of it that we can document on politics, and probably a whole lot more.
Well, yeah, and we saw that back in the Obama administration when the government mandated what was going to happen with General Motors, for example. Rick Wagner was out because Obama said, you're not going to be here. And then you had Ratner come in as the car czar. How perfect is that? A man, of course, he's a very smart economist, but unfortunately he's never run anything about cars. I'm not sure he knows how to change the oil in his car. Maybe he does. But he took over. The union got a seat at the board. Actually, I thought they broke SEC law along the way in terms of the bond, the equity of the bonds. So all of that went up in the air, and yet, the unions, they did well with that.
No, they did indeed. And indeed, the problems at the UAW are even bigger than that. A couple of their former presidents are in jail now for corruption and embezzlement, which points to the other benefit of right to work. When the bosses are stealing and embezzling because they're corrupt in a right to work environment, the workers are free to say, you know what, I don't need my money going to that. And so they walk, and it leads to much more responsible and accountable union bosses. So you get better unions out of a right to work law, too.
Hey, Greg, we've got to take a quick break. Folks, we're going to be right back with Greg Mourad from the National Right to Work Committee. Still a lot more to talk about. Stay with us.
Promoting American industry. This is Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Roffman, and we are together with Greg Mourad from the National Right to Work Committee. So, under the Biden administration, Obama, he was all in and really working side by side with the unions and doing their bidding. And whenever they were being rejected, like in Tennessee and with I believe it was the Volkswagen plant, they had the election.
It was VW,
and they lost the unions.
And they did the vote a few times.
And then the Obama administration, we got to do it again and do it again. And very, very active in making it very difficult for employers to have a campaign to tell their side of the story. Of course, the unions could tell their side of the story, but if the company wanted to tell their side of the story.
That's a very important point. They were restricted as to how much they can discuss and the time they could take to reach out and communicate with their employees.
And that was a big deal. Companies needed to turn over personal information and where people lived and phone numbers and
card check.
All of the
Remember card check?
Exactly.
Let's ask about that. That was a big deal too.
Well, that's to vote in public.
Exactly.
To let everybody know where you stand. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, four or five tough guys show up at your door and don't leave until you've signed their so-called authorization card. It's really a criminal racket. You're voting with the union goons breathing down your neck and looking over your shoulder. If
your doorbell rings and a guy named Cheech is standing there, don't let him in.
So is that? But under the Obama administration, he was very active in that. They were very, very active in that. Do you see Biden, in the same sort of way as Obama as far as supporting? He always says he's a union guy. He's always a union guy. But it just seemed to me that Obama was much more overt in the things that his administration was doing. And maybe I'm just wrong.
It's actually even worse under Biden.
It's under, there you go.
It's gotten a lot worse. Biden's National Labor Relations Board is trying to impose by regulatory fiat something that they couldn't get through Congress and probably will never be able to get through Congress, which is this notion of unionizing by card check. The current General Counsel of the National Labor Relations Board is pushing hard for rule changes and rulemaking and case decisions that will go back to an old standard that hasn't been around for 70 years, that will make it much, much easier for the unions to organize without that secret ballot vote that protects workers, at least gives them some minimal protection from the depredations of union bosses. So it's much worse. Biden is out there said, I intend to be the most pro-union president in American history. And, of course, when he says pro-union, what he really means is pro-union boss.
Well, yeah, exactly that. He always brings it up. And he says, and it always comes up when he's saying, I sat around with my father at the, the kitchen table. And we discussed this. These great pro-union jobs. You know what else bothers me? When you have these government outreaches like this, and it goes back to these federal mandates for work and minimum wages. Ultimately, as you're aptly pointing out, that when this happens, the worker actually suffers. The worker actually
absolutely.
suffers. And when you mandate what you're going to pay somebody, centralized planning in Washington, everyone's got to get X number of dollars, $15, $18, $20, $22 no matter what, that's what you're going to pay them. I mean, the studies are out there, and the studies show that you lose jobs. The individuals may make a few bucks for, a little bit more, but then those jobs disappear. So it just seems like ultimately the worker really loses in the whole deal here.
Oh, absolutely. And there's another provision the unions are pushing really hard now as part of the old card check bill back when they were running that, now incorporated into a new bill that they're pushing hard, that would impose binding arbitration on union and employer contract negotiations. So currently, the union, if it gets organized, then begins bargaining with an employer. And under current law, nobody is required to agree to any particular provision. You bargain until you come up with something you can both live with and the company can survive with. Under these new provisions, if they give them 3 months to negotiate a contract, and if they can't come to an agreement on that contract, a government arbiter will then say, this is the contract, you will operate this way or you will not operate. And so the government ends up dictating not only wages, but all of the terms and conditions of employment.
Yeah, absolutely, and incredible. And to know that, that you have a political party that is so financially involved and so financially benefiting from it. You said that, $2 billion goes into politics, and you said it's probably much higher than that.
That we know about.
That's much higher than that.
Yeah.
And it's all going to the Democrat Party. It's just the recycling of the money.
Yes.
Yeah, almost all of it.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the shades of Solyndra and all the the government deciding who shall get and who shall not get, and we knew that money as well as the union money just got recycled because these are all the people who are working with the Obama administration in those days, because we cover that every week. The nepotism in the Obama administration was unbelievable.
So, Greg, we just got a few minutes. Joe Wilson's bill, National Right to Work Act, does that have any chance at all?
Well, you never give up fighting for these things. Right now, our goal this year is to have hearings in Congress and get them to vote on it. And if we can get a roll call vote, I think that's a win no matter which way it goes, because it forces all of those politicians to vote up or down whether they want to support a bill, a simple freedom bill that's supported by 80% of the American people, or if they want to stand with the union bosses in favor of more forced power for them. In the long term, we are going to pass this bill. I think the odds of getting Joe Biden to sign it are pretty slim, so we may have to wait for another president. But in the long term, I think freedom is inevitably going to win.
Excellent. That's a great way to end the segment. Greg Mourad, National Right to Work Committee. Greg, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.